They say airports smell like beginnings, but to me they smell like endings. Last cups of coffee gone cold. Perfume that won't travel. The starch of uniforms too clean to touch. The line at immigration curled like a sleeping serpent under lights that made everyone look one shade paler. Somewhere, a child kept hiccuping, a sound like a squeaky hinge trying to open a door no one had the energy to push. I stood there in the middle of it all, with the envelope pressed flat against my chest, and the salt of my own tears drying on my cheeks, sticky as confession. I hadn't meant to cry. I had promised myself I wouldn't. Promised in the bathroom mirror, back in the connecting terminal, where the water ran lukewarm and the hand dryer roared like a warning. I'd held my face under the faucet just long enough to scold the redness, to say, quietly, pull yourself together, Layla. Smile at the officer. Keep your voice steady. Tell them the truth, but tell it like you're already safe. Truth is stubborn. It won't let you rehearse it. The people behind me laughed when I tried to dab my face with a paper napkin from my pocket, and the napkin disintegrated. Not cruel, not exactly, just tired laughter. The way strangers laugh when they mistake fear for clumsiness, because it's easier than admitting they know the difference. Rough night, a man in a blazer asked. Half smile tilted the way men do when they want to be kind without becoming responsible. His accent placed him in a country I had never seen and would probably never visit. I nodded, as if night were the only word, large enough to hold all the hours I had just lived. First time? A woman whispered, soft as lint. I didn't answer. The line shuffled forward 3 grudging steps. The serpentine belt sighed as it flexed. The bin with confiscated apple cores and half-empty water bottles filled by inches. I could feel my legs humming with the leftover courage that gets you onto a plane and then abandons you at the gate. The envelope warmed under my palms. In it, copies of names that know me and names that tried to erase me. A letter from the clinic with the doctor's stamp, like a small blue insistence that my body had been through what it had been through. Old photographs where I was almost smiling, and one handwriting I could identify by heart with my eyes closed. The envelope had traveled further than I had, transferring from friend to cousin to a volunteer whose name I only knew as a kindness pronounced over a bad phone connection. I had slept with it in my jacket in case I forgot who I was in a dream. Ahead, officers sat in glass boxes, their faces washed in screen light. Some looked bored. One looked haunted. One had the posture of a man who can afford to be unkind or gentle and hasn't decided yet. When the young officer at lane 8 waved the couple in front of me forward, I watched his hands, beautiful hands, careful with the passports, as if paper could be bruised. He smiled at their toddler, asked a question about a stuffed bear, returned their documents with a nod that was almost paternal. I loved him a little for that nod. And then, because I knew what it meant to hope too hard in strangers, pretended not to. My turn. The belt nudged my knees. The line breathed. Next, someone said, and I stepped into the square of light that makes your mouth go dry. He didn't look up at first. Passport. His tone was flat in the way a monotone can be kind if you let it. Nothing in it to make you flinch. I placed the small maroon booklet on the counter, my hands not trusting their own steadiness. Then I put the envelope beside it. Always the envelope. The order mattered in my head. Identity, then evidence. Person, then proof. His eyes flicked to the envelope, and for a heartbeat, something like weariness crossed his face. The weariness of a man who has opened too many things people called hope, and found paperwork inside. What's this? Documents, I said. I heard my voice and thought, it will do. If it must, it will do. Letters. A statement. From the clinic. And the other word stuck in my throat. The word that carried a room I would never walk into again. And a letter from a priest. A friend. He paused. And in that pause, The line behind me shifted, to get a better angle for the spectacle of my trembling. The officer's eyes lifted. They were not the color people write poems about. They were a gray you only notice when you're close enough to count the sleep missing from someone's week. Reason for travel? He asked. Because the forms insist on choreography, even when your feet won't. I breathed once, the way the midwife in the clinic had taught me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6, as if mathematics could leash a heart. To seek entry, I said. The right words seemed theatrical, in the mouth of a woman who had left everything behind in a night bag that still smelled of the detergent she used when life had a shape. To be safe, I finished. Because honesty is a small room, and I was already in it. The laughter behind me changed. Less amused now, more nervous. We are all unkind to the truth until we need it to speak for us. Step aside, please. He gestured to a roped-off area a few feet away, a holding patch where light pooled, and the floor felt stickier. The words sounded like an eraser. My knees obeyed him, because I had promised myself I would obey everything until I could put a door between me and obedience forever. In the secondary line, another officer asked the same questions in a voice that grated. I answered the same answers, swallowing each syllable so my throat wouldn't begin to burn with that old stupid heat of humiliation. "Open the envelope," she said, and I nodded. And my hands, my traitor hands, wouldn't tear the paper cleanly, so I picked at the seal like a child. When I looked up, Lane 8's officer had left his station and crossed the aisle to us. He stood a little behind the grading officer, not interfering, just there, like a shadow that had made a decision. "Let me," he said, and took the envelope, breaking the seal with a thumb, as if documents and the things they try to hold cannot cut you if opened politely. Papers fanned out on the counter. He didn't shuffle them the way bureaucrats do to enforce a ranking. He just looked at stamps, at dates, at the blue-inked letterhead from a place that still called itself holy, at a photograph of me holding a small knitted blue hat in a room where the window had been painted shut. He paused on the letter with the corner bent and the crease worn pale. The handwriting on it had changed everything in my life twice. First when it said stay, then when it said run. He read a line, then another, and something changed in his mouth. Not a wince, not pity. The thing that comes after both. When a human recognizes another human through a window they didn't mean to open. A murmur from the impatient queue rose behind us. The second officer coughed with the authority of someone who has never had her authority weighed and found wanting. "We don't need—" "I do," he said, not looking at her, and it was quiet again. "Layla," he said then, reading my name the way you say a prayer, without testifying to your faith. The sound of it in his voice steadied the floor under my feet. "How long since you slept?" I almost laughed. Of all the questions a country could ask a person at its door, this one was the only one I could answer without lying. 2 days, I said. Maybe 3. I lost count between the station and the bus. He nodded as if I had given him something precious to carry, then kept reading. His finger paused at the clinic stamp. "You went alone," he said, not a question. "They wouldn't allow—" He didn't finish. Because men say fewer sentences when a woman's body is the predicate. There was a sound like a bird hitting glass, soft but absolute, and I realized it had come from me. The smallest gasp. The kind you make when someone says aloud a thing you've put in a box with no corners. "There wasn't anyone," I said. "Not that day." He touched the edge of the priest's letter with a care that felt like apology. "Addressed to the wrong person." "Is he here?" he asked. "The one who wrote this?" I shook my head. "He's still there." He knew your language. He said names travel further when you write them in the tongue that will judge them.
A corner of the officer's mouth tilted, the expression of someone who knows an old wisdom when it sits down beside him. He turned one more page, the notarized statement from a neighbor who had watched my hallway like a sentry the night I decided that moving my feet was more important than winning. And then he exhaled, a sound like weather turning. "Come with me," he said. And the second officer bristled out of habit, and he repeated gently, "Come." We left the Serpentine Belt and the impatient murmurs behind. We walked past the posters that show happy people holding hands under flags and slogans about welcome, written in fonts too cheerful for truth. He opened a door onto a room with a couch that had known too many worried bodies, and a kettle that gurgled like it wanted to be helpful. On a shelf, a box of tissues that looked like parody. "Sit," he said. I didn't. If I sat, I would sink, and if I sank, I might not surface. He read that in my face and didn't insist. Instead, he handed me a paper cup and poured hot water over a tea bag as if mending things were possible with enough steam. "I'm Officer Hale," he said. "Daniel." He waited, and I realized he was offering me his first name to place between us like a plank across a gap. "Layla," I said again, because names sometimes need saying twice to be believed. He nodded. "Layla, I'm going to ask you some questions you've already answered. I'll write less than you say. Not because your words aren't needed, but because the form is small and the story is not." He held my gaze until he was sure I knew the difference. "May I?" There was a crack in the door. On the other side of it, the airport kept being itself, loud and bright and rhythmically impatient. Behind my eyes, the clinic fluorescence buzzed, and the midwife's little braid ticked my wrist when she pressed my hand. I pictured the envelope emptied onto the counter like a body's contents onto a tray and thought, if I don't speak now, my voice will learn that silence is what it has earned. "Yes," I said, and tasted salt. I told him about the train station where I had counted tiles instead of minutes, so I wouldn't begin estimating my life in waiting. I told him about the apartment door, splintered from the last time it had been convinced that a person is a thing. I told him the parts of the story that belonged to me, and left out the parts that belonged to a man I refused to name with the dignity of being blamed for everything. I told him about the clinic's kind nurse who labeled my fear like it was a specimen and said, "We know how to hold this. You're not the first." I told him about the priest who had learned all the words for mercy in 3 languages and used them all in one letter because sometimes the more words you pile, the more likely it is that one will be believed. I told him about the night I took the blue hat out of the drawer and put it back. Because grief, too, needs a ritual. He didn't interrupt except to ask a date when the form insisted on precision or a spelling when the form refused to accept my accent. When I reached the part where I said, "and then," and no words came after it because there are endings that don't make sound, he folded his hands and let the quiet live between us, the way you let a small animal decide if it trusts your palm. When I ran out of sentences, he capped his pen. "Thank you," he said, as if I had offered him something he wasn't worthy to carry. "I'm going to run this upstairs." He tapped the folder he had made from my story. "It won't take long." The phrase, "won't take long," means different things in different rooms. In airports, it can be an hour or a lifetime. He was back in 15 minutes that stretched like rubber bands going white at the pull. He had a small smile he didn't let reach his eyes, because men in uniforms learn not to look pleased when doing ordinary kindness, lest they be accused of being human on company time. "Layla," he said, "we're granting you temporary entry pending the next steps. You'll have to return for an interview with someone who has memorized both the rules and the parts of the rules that bend. For now, you can breathe." He placed a stamped slip in front of me as if a stamp is a bridge. I didn't try to thank him in grand words I didn't have. "Thank you," I said. Small, sufficient. He looked like a man who wanted to add something and knew better. Then he seemed to decide that knowing better was the wrong choice. "There's one more thing," he said. "The letter. From the priest." He lifted it between 2 fingers. "May I keep a copy?" I hesitated. Why? He folded, unfolding, considering the truth that would do the least harm. Because... And then he stopped and started again in a voice that knew it was about to betray a private room in his chest. "Because my mother kept a letter like this in the pantry behind the sugar for years. She never needed to use it. She never had to. But knowing it was there made breathing, a thing she could do on days she swore she'd forgotten how. The world tilted again, but differently. Not a fall, a shift. The door between strangers opened a fraction. "You laughed at people like me?" I asked, And he flinched before he realized I was teasing him the way you throw a pebble at a wave to see if it will change direction. "No," he said. But when I was younger, I didn't understand why anyone would pack paper heavier than clothing. We both almost smiled. He made the copy. He stamped the stamp. He returned the originals to my envelope the way people return babies to arms they respect. Then he stood, and I did too, and the moment of gratitude asked to be held without ceremony. "If anyone asks why you were crying in my line," he said, "tell them you were washing your face." I laughed then. Not because it was funny, not because it was true, but because laughter returns to a body like rain, returns to a country that thought it had forgotten how to be green. We walked back through the door, into the noise. The second officer eyed the stamp and nodded, the way people nod when someone else has done the work of deciding. The serpent line inched forward. The man in the blazer checked his watch. The woman with the soft whisper wiped at her eyes with a sleeve. As I lifted my bag from the floor, my hands didn't shake. The belt nudged someone else's knees. The line breathed me out, and I stepped into the country with my envelope against my chest and the heat of the kettle still in my hands, and I told myself a new rule I hadn't known how to write before. I am here. I am here. I am here. Behind me, a child hiccuped once, then stopped. The sound of a body remembering how to belong. The first thing I learned about being admitted on a stamp and a promise is that relief doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in small mercies. Paper cups of tea that don't go cold, doors that close and stay closed, the weight of a bed that belongs to no one but doesn't ask you who you are. Daniel, Officer Hale when the badge was on, walked me as far as the exit doors, the kind that opened like a blessing, and handed me a folded sheet with an address circled in blue. "Reception center," he said. "They'll have a bed. It's not much, but it's yours for now." He hesitated, as if deciding whether to ruin his uniform's reputation. "If anyone gives you trouble, tell them the stamp is fresh." Outside, the city smelled like wet metal and old bread. A bus sighed its way to the curb and took me where he'd pointed, past buildings that watched themselves in shop windows, past people who wore their lives like coats that fit, past a river that moved with the entitlement of something that had been here longer than everyone and would outlast them too. I held the envelope inside my jacket like a passenger I had promised to deliver alive. At the center, the woman at the desk wore a cardigan and a face clearly built to keep other people's emergencies from spilling. She had a pen stuck in her hair like a forgetful garden stake. "Name," she said, not unkindly, just making sure language continued. I told her, and she wrote it down as if that act alone might keep me from vanishing. "We've got a room on the 3rd floor. 2 beds, bathroom down the hall. Breakfast is functional." She slid a laminated card toward me. "Orientation at 8. Show up even if you don't know how to. They'll explain what comes next." Then lower, quieter. "You're safe here. Not forever. But now is a generous God when forever has been unkind." The room was the color of decisions no one wanted to make. Thin curtains, 2 iron beds, a window that didn't open all the way, as if the building believed in hope but wanted to keep it on a leash. The other bed was made, a neat square of blanket, a small bag at its foot. On the nightstand between the beds, a plastic lily in a chipped vase tried very hard to pretend. I set the envelope down and then, for the first time in 2 days, I let my bag slip from my shoulder without flinching at the sound. I washed my face in a bathroom that had learned 1,000 kinds of crying and pretended that made it good at listening. The mirror gave me a woman I recognized only in bone. Hair tied in a knot that had stopped being decorative and started being survival. Eyes that had kept too many watches. I touched the place near my throat where the priest's letter had burned like a small, kind brand, and felt the ache that belongs to things you chose and things you didn't. When I came back, the other bed had acquired an owner. A girl. No, a woman young enough to make a girl of herself if she wanted. Sat on the edge, shoes off, toes curled on the linoleum as if reminding the ground what it's for. She had a scarf wound around her wrist like a promise. "I'm Mina," she said, and her smile was the brave kind, the kind that believes if it goes first, the day might follow. "You can have the side with the radiator. It hisses at night like a mother." "Layla," I said. I wanted to offer her a story. I offered my name instead, because we had to start somewhere. We spent the first hour in the choreography of strangers, trying not to read each other too fast. Folding, arranging, noticing without asking. She had one book in a language we shared with different accents. I had none. She had a sweater that had once been someone's favorite. I had a watch that had stopped, which felt like honesty. We both had envelopes. Her eyes flicked to mine, then away. Not curiosity exactly, but recognition. The way two people nod at each other in a waiting room when they're pretending they're there for routine. Orientation? She asked. At 8, I said. She nodded. They make you write your name 5 times. By the end, you start to believe it's yours. We went downstairs early because being early feels like competence when everything else has been stripped. A man with the posture of a former coach and the heart of a volunteer handed out forms and muffins that tasted like someone's kind attempt. I'm Ray, he said. I say the same sentences every morning. Forgive the repetition. There's a clinic partnership down the block. If you need a doctor, you go there first, not the ER. There's legal intake on Thursdays. Bring what you have, and if you don't have it, bring yourself and we'll make a list. There's coffee in the corner. Do not insult it by calling it good, but do drink it. We laughed in the way people laugh when the room offers them a straw to breathe through. He took our names, our countries, the languages we can swear and weep in, our last known addresses and our first known kindnesses. He didn't ask for that last one, but I wrote it anyway, in the margin. Sophia in the clinic, small hands, kind voice. He gave back a folder with my name on the tab, and I almost cried again because no one had tabbed my name before. When he finished the official talk, he did a smaller one, the one that belongs to people and not programs. You will be told to be patient. You will be patient until the word tastes like chalk. Find a way to be impatient for yourselves. Learn the bus. Learn a corner to stand on where the sun hits in the afternoon. Learn the name of the cat that lives behind the bakery. Your case is a story, yes, but so is your day. Make the day tell you something kind. After he looked at our folders, one by one, and told us what would happen in the next 24 hours the way people tell kids how long until the cake. Layla, he said when it was my turn, you've got an initial interview scheduled in 10 days. That's both good and not enough. Good because someone wrote expedite on your file. He flipped a paper. Not enough because the body keeps time, not calendars. We'll see a counselor before then. You bring me any documents you're willing to copy. We scan, we store, we back up. Your truth deserves a backup. I thought of Daniel asking for the priest letter and my mother's old superstition about copies stealing the power of the original. I'll bring it, I said. I didn't know if I would. Mina and I split an orange in the courtyard where pigeons held their parliament. She told me about a brother who played the oud like an apology, about a grandmother who had taught her to sew straight, even when the fabric pulled, about a bus station where she'd learned to sleep in 15-minute loops. I told her about nothing, not because I didn't want to, because some days if you take the lid off, you don't know how to put it back. Back in the room, I opened my envelope and did inventory like a conscientious clerk. The clinic letter, stamped with the date that is now written in my bones. The neighbor's statement, in a hand angry enough to make the pen squeak. I heard shouting. I called. No one came. I watched her leave with a bag, and I did not stop her because I am not a fool. A photocopy of my passport's useful page. 2 photographs. The one in the clinic, the blue hat on my lap like a season, my face a geography of almost. And the one before everything strange. My hair unpinned, my mouth on the edge of a grin, a shadow on my shoulder that I had once told myself was a tree. And the priest's letter. I unfolded it, the paper already going soft where I had touched it too often. His handwriting was the handwriting of a man who had learned to write in a war and never stopped writing that way. Fast, urgent, refusing flourishes as if flourish were a sin. Layla, I have written this in a language that will not mispronounce you. When I bless a child, I say the name twice, in case the first time is only the echo. I will write yours twice here. Layla, Layla. I am not brave. I am an old man with a book, but I will stand at the door of the room you are leaving and keep it closed. If anyone asks where you have gone, I will say, she has gone to the truth, and the truth is not here. If anyone asks why you left, I will say, because she learned that love is not a synonym for ownership. If anyone asks who helped you, I will say, I cooked eggs. She did the rest. Carry this letter like bread. Tear from it what you need to keep walking. When you arrive, tell them I am real. Tell them I know the color of the wall in the clinic. Tell them I know the nurse's braid and the sound the kettle makes when grief finally lets you lift it from the stove. Tell them I am not the evidence, you are. But let them keep this paper so the paper can carry some of the weight. I folded it back, slower, and breathed as if my ribs had learned how. Mina watched without asking to read. "Do you think they read what we bring?" she said. "Or do they read what our faces bring?" "Both," I said. On good days, the walls were thin. That night, we met all our neighbors by the sound of their sleep. The woman down the hall who dreamed in sentences and apologized into them. The man in 3B whose snore learned to sound like a saw. The baby next door who took the same 3 breaths between cries every single time as if practicing a speech. At 4 a.m., the radiator hissed like a mother, just as Mina had promised. And I laughed into my pillow because prophecy, however small, can hold up a morning. The next week became a pattern I could carry without dropping. Legal clinic on Thursday, a room of chairs and knees, the air bright with fluorescent ambition, bus routes learned by mouth not map, Mina counting stops on her fingers, me counting the bakeries because the smell tells time, calls to my cousin that didn't go through. The ring that rings forever is sometimes worse than silence. The quiet routine of eating what the center served and then pretending we chose it. On the 3rd day, Ray introduced me to a woman with hair like a storm cloud and a voice like a lullaby that meant business. "This is Sana," he said. "She knows the way through rooms that were built to confuse you." Sana shook my hand with the decisiveness of a signature. "We're going to build your packet," she said. "Not a fortress. Fortresses fall, but a bridge." She asked for copies of what I had, asked for dates I didn't want to remember, asked for names I didn't want to say, and let me not say them. "We can write a man," she said, tapping the space where a proper noun would usually lord it over the sentence. "The harm doesn't need his first name to keep its shape." She lifted the clinic letter, eyes scanning the stamp, the signature. "They were kind," she said, and the way she said it told me she had seen letters written after rooms where kindness did not fit. "The timeline helps." She slid a form across the table. "Write the day you decided to leave. Not the day you left. The day you decided." I hesitated. It felt like asking a tree for the day it understood wind. "It matters," she said. "It shows the story doesn't start with panic. It starts with a sentence." That night I wrote, "At the sink, when the cup broke in my hand and I bled quietly over the ceramic, and no one in the building turned down the television because they have learned the sound of a woman not making trouble. That is the day I decided not to be furniture in someone else's room." I gave Sana the line. She looked at me for a long breath, then nodded once as if I'd placed a stone exactly where a bridge had needed it. On the 7th day, Daniel found me. Not at the center, he wouldn't cross that line, but in the coffee shop, across from the river where the cups were chipped like old smiles and the barista had a tattoo in a language none of us could read, but all of us wanted to. I saw him first in the glass, his reflection trying not to be intrusive. He lifted a hand, waited to be waved over like a student who had learned to respect the front of the room. I waved. "I have something for you," he said, and for a foolish second I thought, another stamp? A deed to a house? A letter from a future that had finally learned my address. He put a card on the table instead. "Community clinic. They do trauma counseling that doesn't treat you like a file. I can't promise you anything except that they won't be lazy with your pain." I held the card like a charm. "Thank you," I said. "You didn't have to." "Someone did it for my mother," he said. "I can be the someone this time." He looked at the envelope in my bag as if greeting an old friend. "Did you copy the letter?" "I did," I said. "The priest says paper can carry weight." He smiled. "My mother used to say paper can carry shame too. That's why we write it down and hand it away."
We talked like people who have learned the art of keeping a conversation standing up. No sudden dives. No questions that require chairs. He told me a story about losing a passport once, his own, before he learned how to care for other people's. I told him a story about a bus driver who had let me ride an extra stop because the rain did not understand schedules. When he left, he didn't say, "See you," because he knew we might not. He said, "Breath in 4, hold 4, out 6. And I laughed because watching a man adopt a midwife's math with reverence is proof there might be a God, if only a small one who oversees kettles and stamps. The interview appointment came like a knock in my chest. Sana sat with me in the waiting room, where the chairs were bolted to the floor, and the air had been taught to be surely neutral. "You'll say the story until the story knows it belongs to you," she said. "When they ask you the same question twice, Answer like a river. Same path, different water. She squeezed my shoulder once. The way a coach blesses an athlete without pretending to be a priest. If they interrupt, do not apologize. The truth is not rude. The officer who called my name had hair that refused to be told what to do. She smiled once. Tired, professional, not unkind. She asked me for dates, for places, for the color of a door. She asked me to explain the clinic's letter in words she would recognize. And I did, carefully, measuring each syllable so it would not fall off the table. She asked me if I feared going back. I said, I fear waking up in rooms where my name is an inconvenience. She wrote that down. She asked me if I had anyone here. I said, not yet, and thought of Mina on our thin-walled floors counting the radiators, breaths and Ray, mispronouncing perfection with humor, and Sana's storm cloud hair, and Daniel's small kettle in a room that smelled like nerves and paper. She wrote no, because the form has small boxes with sharp corners and prefers clean emptiness to messy hope. When we finished, the officer's pen hovered over the last line, the place where you choose between stamped words and stamped words. She looked up and held my gaze long enough for me to understand that she was not failing to see me. She was seeing all of us. We'll be in touch, she said. I know, that's not a sentence that holds water. But I mean it. On the way back to the center, the city did a small kindness. The rain held off until I reached the awning. The crosswalk light turned green as if we were already friends. The bus driver waited an extra breath for a woman running with a stroller. In the room, Mina sat on her bed with a letter in her lap. Her face the face you make when you've been visited by a past that insists on speaking. She folded it, unfolded it, then tucked it under the plastic lily. As if flowers could be trusted to keep secrets. You okay? I asked. She nodded. I will be. Someday. Not yet. We lay there in our separate beds, in a room that had learned too much about the word thin. And we listened to the building settle, and the radiator hiss, and the baby next door take 3 breaths, cry, 3 breaths, sleep. I lay my palm on my envelope, not to check it was still there, but to remind it I was. I thought of the priest's last line, carry this letter like bread, and realized I had been chewing small pieces all day, letting the starch turn sweet, letting my jaw rest on something that did not argue back. I slept. When I woke, the window held a square of new light, and the city sounded like utensils, like buses, like people forgiving their mornings for being ordinary. In the courtyard, Ray taught a boy how to throw a ball without apologizing. At the desk, the cardigan woman explained to a man who had never used a calendar what a Thursday feels like. Upstairs, Mina whispered, okay to the space above her pillow until it believed her. And in my folder, my name sat on a tab, like a small flag placed on a map, where no one expected a country to grow. I boiled water in the shared kitchen and counted to 4, held for 4, breathed out for 6. And when Sana walked in with her storm cloud hair and said, the first answer is always, I am here. I said it back to her without choking on it. I am here, I said. The kettle whistled, triumphant. Later, when I left for the clinic that did not treat me like a file, I passed the immigration hall on my way across town. The line curled as it always does, patient and irritated, and making little jokes to keep itself upright. A woman stood near lane 8 with a paper napkin melting in her hands, washing her face with tears. People behind her laughed, not cruel, just tired. I stopped long enough to take a packet of tissues from my bag and put it in her palm. She looked up, surprised into gratitude. It's okay, I said. Tell them you're washing your face. She blinked, breathed, and almost smiled. The line shifted. The belt nudged knees. The room breathed, and I kept walking, the envelope a little lighter against my chest, as if paper can learn to carry itself when it has been believed enough. Morning in a strange country, doesn't feel like morning at all. It feels like being born into someone else's dream. A sky the wrong shade of blue. Birds that sing in a language your heart hasn't learned to translate yet. I woke up in a transit hostel near the airport. Its walls painted the color of dull hope, its corridors echoing with the sounds of suitcases dragging destinies across the floor. I had slept for maybe 3 hours, and still, I woke from a dream of running, always running. My fingers reached for the envelope before my eyes even opened. It was still there, under the pillow. The paper warm, the edges soft from too much handling. It was the only thing I owned that didn't feel borrowed. The kettle in the corner wheezed. I made tea from a paper packet that said chamomile, but tasted of cardboard and memory. When I lifted the cup to my lips, my hands were steady. For the first time in months, my hands didn't shake. Downstairs, the hostel's breakfast room smelled of burnt toast and instant coffee. A dozen other faces sat around the chip tables. Faces that looked like mine, and faces that didn't, all carrying that same thin film of exhaustion. Some smiled at me, some didn't. We were all between places, suspended like clothes hung to dry on a windy day. A woman wearing a headscarf offered me a seat. "You're new," she said. Her accent was heavy, melodic. "You came last night?" I nodded. "Don't worry," she said. "Everyone cries the first day. Some of us just do it in private." She smiled with a kindness that didn't demand anything back. "Where are you from?" I hesitated. The question used to have an easy answer, but now my country was a border that had bitten me. "South," I said vaguely. "Far south." "Ah," she said knowingly. "Everywhere south is too hot, too loud, or too cruel. I'm from east. We ran from soldiers." I didn't ask what she ran from. People who've left home know better than to measure grief like currency. She looked at my envelope, resting on the table beside my tea. "That looks important." "It is," I said softly. "It's proof that I'm still me." She nodded. "Then keep it close." They asked for papers before they asked for names. Later that morning, I took a bus into the city for my first appointment. A processing center, with walls the color of bureaucracy. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and nervousness. The waiting room was lined with metal chairs and signs printed in 6 languages. One of them, mercifully, was mine. A woman in a navy blazer called my name. Layla Hassan. The first time I'd heard it pronounced correctly in weeks. She led me into a cubicle where the walls didn't reach the ceiling. The sound of other people's stories leaked through like whispers, through fabric. "I'll need to see your documents," she said briskly. I slid the envelope across the desk, careful not to let it leave my fingertips, until she reached for it. She opened it, skimming the contents the way people skim a story they've already decided the ending of. When she reached the priest's letter, she frowned. "What's this?" "A testimony," I said. "He knew what happened. He wrote to confirm it." She glanced at me, then back at the letter. "We don't usually accept personal correspondence." I swallowed. "It's not just personal. It's the only proof of what was done, and of why I had to leave." Her eyes softened slightly. She folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope with care. "All right," she said. "I'll keep it in your file. It might help." Might. The word people use when they want to sound hopeful, but not responsible. When I left the building, the sun was too bright. I stood on the steps, blinking against it. Everything looked cleaner here. The roads, the buildings, even the sadness. In my country, sorrow gathers dust. Here, it was polished, efficient, neatly filed away. I walked without knowing where I was going, my shoes clicking against the pavement like punctuation. At a small park, I sat on a bench and watched pigeons fight over crumbs. They reminded me of home in a strange way. Always hungry, always surviving. That's when I saw the same officer from the airport, Daniel Hale. He was standing near a newsstand, in civilian clothes now. A soft grey shirt, sleeves rolled up, He was buying coffee, smiling politely at the vendor, and I almost didn't recognize him without the uniform. But then he looked up and our eyes met. Recognition flickered, followed by something quieter. Relief, maybe, that I was still standing. He approached, slowly, as if approaching a bird he didn't want to startle. "Layla," he said, my name sounding different in the open air. "You found the place?" "Yes," I said. "They gave me a room and tea." "Good." He hesitated. "How are you?" The question was too big. I wanted to answer truthfully. To say I don't know yet, I think I'm still landing. But all I managed was, "I'm learning to sleep again." He nodded. "That's a start." We stood in silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need filling. Then he said, I read that letter again. The one from the priest. It's rare. Something like that. Most people who write to authority sound desperate or angry. He just sounded hopeful. I smiled faintly. He said hope was the only weapon God allowed him to keep. Daniel's lips curved into the smallest smile. "Sounds like someone I'd like to meet." "He would have liked you," I said. For a moment, I wanted to tell him everything. The village, the night of the fire, the choice that wasn't a choice. But the words stayed behind my teeth. Instead, I asked, "Why are you here?" "Routine," he said. "Sometimes I come check the centers, make sure people get processed properly." He hesitated. "But maybe I also wanted to see if you'd eaten." It should have sounded patronizing, but it didn't. There was something in his voice that felt like apology disguised as concern. "I have," I said softly. "Thank you for what you did that night." He looked away toward the sea of people crossing the street. "It's my job." "No," I said. "What you did wasn't your job." He didn't argue. After he left, I sat there a long time, holding the paper cup he'd bought me before walking away. The heat bled through the cardboard into my hands, the same way his kindness had bled through the walls of duty. For the first time in a long while, I let myself believe that maybe the world hadn't completely closed its doors to me. That night, I wrote a letter I would never send. To Father Elias, the priest. "Father, I made it. I'm somewhere where rain falls like blessing, not like warning." They asked questions, many questions, but someone listened before deciding. "You said I'd find angels in unexpected uniforms." You were right. The man at the border looked like a god, but he opened the door like a shepherd. "Please tell the others I am safe. Tell them I still carry your letter. It's the only thing that never feels heavy." Layla, I folded the page and slipped it into the envelope, where it would stay with the others. Not mailed, but kept, like proof that I had begun to speak again. The first month in the new country moved like a clock that had forgotten how to tick. Days stretched, thin and nervous, and nights folded over me like sheets that didn't belong to my body. There's a loneliness that doesn't roar. It hums, low and constant, like the fluorescent lights in the corridors of temporary shelters. Every morning began with the same sound. Footsteps in the hall, coffee machines coughing, a door that always closed too hard. I started counting the slams instead of the hours. The world here obeyed different rhythms. Orderly, polite, slightly cruel in its efficiency. The social worker assigned to my case was named Helen. She had short blonde hair and the kind of expression that made you feel like a line on a checklist. "You'll be attending language classes 3 times a week," she said during our first meeting, typing faster than she listened. "We'll review your progress monthly. Until your interview is complete, avoid missing appointments." They noticed things like that. They, always they, the invisible they who held the stamp that decided whether you were real or temporary. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. Helen looked up then, her eyes softening just slightly. "It'll get easier," she said, the way someone might tell a drowning person that the water will soon stop being cold. The city was large enough to forget me. I rented a room from an old widow who didn't ask questions. Her name was Marta, and she smelled faintly of onions and lavender soap. She spoke little English, and I spoke even less of her language. But silence between women who've lost too much is often fluent. Every morning, she left me a bowl of porridge and a boiled egg on the counter. "Eat," she would say, pointing with her spoon. Strong first, sad after. That became our ritual. Eat first, cry later. Sometimes, when the radio played old love songs in her language, she hummed along softly. And I thought about my mother, her garden, her humming, the smell of cardamom tea at dusk. Memory, like scent, sneaks past borders. At the immigration center, I filled forms until my hand cramped. Forms that asked country of origin, date of departure, marital status, reason for asylum. There wasn't a box for I left because love turned to threat. There wasn't a line for I stayed too long because I believed apologies. When I handed the paperwork to the officer behind the glass, she said, "Please attach supporting evidence." I opened the envelope again, the same envelope that had become part of my anatomy. Inside, the same documents, the same letter. She glanced at the priest's handwriting, at the signature that had once felt like salvation. "Who was he?" she asked. "My confessor," I said. "And my witness." Her expression didn't change, but her voice did. "Softer now." "He wrote this for you." "Yes." He said the truth needed someone to sign for it. She nodded and slid the papers back to me. "Keep the original," she said. "Some truths are safer when only one person holds them." That afternoon, as I left the center, I saw a group of volunteers distributing food near the park. Among them was Daniel Hale. No uniform this time, just a plain jacket, rolled sleeves, and an expression of calm that looked like work. He spotted me before I could turn away. "Layla," he said, smiling, the kind of smile that doesn't assume welcome, but hopes for it. "Officer Hale." I said awkwardly. "Daniel," he corrected. "Please, I'm not an officer here." I hesitated, then nodded. "Daniel." He handed me a sandwich. Though I wasn't part of the line. "Volunteering?" I asked. "Trying," he said. "Feels better than paperwork." I looked at the crowd. Faces lined with the same weariness that used to stare back at me in the mirror. "You see us here," I said. "And still come," he shrugged. "If you spend enough time at a border, you start to realize everyone's waiting for something. Not just papers. Sometimes it's forgiveness. Sometimes it's sleep." I smiled, but my eyes burned. "You talk like a priest." He laughed softly. "Maybe I read too many letters written by one." We started meeting by accident after that. Once at the library, once at the market, where he was helping an old woman carry bags. He never asked about my past, and I never asked about his. There's a grace in not asking. It leaves space for people to begin again without explaining the ruins. But one evening, when the clouds were the color of bruised violets and the street lamps flickered awake, he asked quietly, "What was in that letter, Layla? The one that made you cry in my line?" I froze. The sound of rain beginning on the pavement. "Why do you want to know?" "Because it changed something in me," he said. "And I don't know what." I looked at him, really looked at him. There was no curiosity in his eyes, only empathy, that rare, dangerous thing that asks for nothing in return. "It wasn't just a letter," I said slowly. "It was an absolution. He wrote that if I ever reached the border, I should hand it to whoever asked me why I left. He said the truth might be safer in another language. Did it work?" "I'm still here," I said, and it was both an answer and not. Weeks passed. I started classes. I learned how to say please and thank you, and I'm trying in a new tongue. I took the train without panicking when the doors closed. I started writing small notes on scraps of paper, things I didn't dare tell anyone else. Today, I didn't cry when the plane flew overhead. Today, I bought an apple without thinking of home. Today, I saw kindness and didn't flinch. But belonging is a patient thief. It steals slowly, politely. One afternoon, Helen called me into her office. "There's been a development," she said, fingers steepled. "Someone from your case's original region contacted the consulate. They're looking for you." The room tilted. "Who?" I whispered. She hesitated. "A man. He didn't give a name, but he mentioned a letter. Something about a letter from a priest." My blood ran cold. Helen's voice softened. "You don't have to worry yet. We're verifying everything. But, Layla, is there anything you need to tell us?" I shook my head slowly. "No, there's nothing left to tell." But inside, my heart began to drum the rhythm of a life I thought I'd outrun. That night, I went to the park where I knew Daniel sometimes went after work. He was there, sitting on the same bench where we'd first spoken, coffee in hand. "Layla," he said when he saw me, and something in his tone told me he already knew I was afraid. "They're looking for me," I whispered. He straightened. "Who?" "I don't know. Someone who said they had my letter." The letter Father Elias wrote. He went still, the color draining slightly from his face. "That letter's in your file," he said. "No one should have access to it." Then how do they know? We sat in silence, the air between us tightening. Finally, Daniel said, "You can stay here. I'll talk to the department tomorrow. No one will touch your case without going through me. But you can't?" "I can," he interrupted softly. "And I will." When I got home, Marta was waiting in the kitchen, her eyes knowing before I spoke. She pressed her hand over mine. "Strong first," she said in her broken English. "Sad after." But that night I couldn't follow her rule. I sat awake, the envelope open on the table, staring at the letter inside. The ink was fading, the edges frayed. And there, between the words of faith and mercy, I noticed something I had never seen before. Faint, in pencil, at the bottom of the page, "If you reach the place safely, tell him I kept my promise." I didn't know what that meant, not yet. But something told me the letter still had work left to do. Rain fell in long, deliberate lines that morning, not like weather, but like handwriting. Every drop hit the window of the immigration office, with the rhythm of someone insisting on being heard. I sat in the waiting area, clutching my folder, the envelope tucked inside, the paper inside that. Layers of my life pressed thin, as if truth could be made portable. Helen had called me an hour earlier. "We've had a visitor regarding your case," she'd said, voice careful. "He requested to see you. You don't have to agree, Layla. But I think you'll want to." That's the kind of sentence that can split your breath in half. Now, the clock above the reception desk ticked too loudly. Every tick was a question. Who? Why now? What did he bring? Across the room, Daniel Hale leaned against the wall, out of uniform but unmistakable. His posture always halfway between soldier and shelter. He'd insisted on being there. "If this is about the letter," he'd told Helen, "she shouldn't face it alone." The door opened. A man stepped in, tall and thin, his grey coat damp from the rain. He removed his hat as if the act still mattered, revealing hair that had gone white unevenly, like ash that hadn't finished burning. His eyes found mine immediately. For a heartbeat, I thought he would call my name, my true name. But he just nodded, polite, reverent even, like a pilgrim approaching an altar he didn't deserve. Helen gestured to a small meeting room. "We'll talk inside." The room smelled of dust and stale coffee. The man placed a leather satchel on the table and unbuckled it with hands that trembled slightly. "Miss Hassan," he said, his voice dry but steady. "My name is Gabriel Moreau. I was a friend of Father Elias." I didn't breathe. The name hit like a chord I hadn't heard in years. "You knew him," I whispered. He nodded. "For more than 30 years. We worked together on the relief missions. I came here as part of the same network that helped him. Help others." His gaze flicked to the envelope in my hands. That letter you carry, I know it. Daniel leaned forward. You say you know it. How? Gabriel opened his satchel and drew out another envelope. Identical in color, in seal, in careful folds. He set it beside mine, because there were two, he said quietly. He wrote one for her, and one for me. He sent mine just before the pause was heavy. Before he was taken, the air left the room. I felt my pulse in my throat. Taken? Gabriel looked down at his hands. There was a raid at the parish 2 months after you left. They accused him of aiding fugitives. He refused to name names. The night before he was arrested, he sent me this. He slid the envelope closer. The seal was broken, but the paper inside was immaculate. Folded with a precision that felt ceremonial, I reached for it with shaking hands. Gabriel, if they come for me, tell her she was right to leave. Tell her the letter she carries was never meant as protection. It was a key. There's a man in the Northern Registry who owes me a favor. He has her true documentation under a different name. She will need it when the time comes. The letter I gave her was written not for the officers, but for the one who would believe. If he reads it and still looks her in the eyes, then she will have found her way home. If she ever reaches safety, tell her I kept my promise to her mother. I watched over her as long as I could. Elias, I couldn't feel my hands anymore. My mother, I whispered. He knew her. Gabriel nodded slowly. They were friends once, before she married. She volunteered with the parish when she was young. He promised her, if anything ever happened, he'd look after her daughter. I felt the world collapse inward, folding memory on memory. The face of my mother at the window, the day she told me to run. The old photograph I'd carried without thinking. The one where she stood beside a man in a black cassock. Both of them smiling like conspirators. That was him. That was Father Elias. Daniel exhaled, low and careful. He wrote that the letter was a key, he said. A key to what? Gabriel pulled a document from the satchel. A yellowed registry form, stamped with an old embassy seal. He kept duplicates of identity records for those he helped. This one matches her birth details, except for the surname. He turned it toward me. At the top, under name at birth, was written in neat ink, Layla Elias. My breath caught. I don't understand, I whispered. That's his name. Gabriel's voice softened. It was your mother's maiden name, but he claimed you as kin, so you could pass through under his protection. You weren't just a refugee to him. You were family. I pressed my hand to my mouth. The sound that escaped me wasn't quite a sob, more a release, something breaking quietly. After holding for too long, all these years I thought he pitied me. He loved you. Gabriel said simply, he loved her, in the way only a man of faith and regret can. Quietly, completely, without ever speaking it aloud. Helen cleared her throat, her eyes glossy behind her glasses. Mr. Moreau, do you have any proof of the Northern Registry he mentioned? He nodded. I've been working to trace it. There's an old archivist still alive. Someone who used to process humanitarian files under coded aliases. I believe he's the one Elias meant, but he's retired now, living in Marseille. I came here because his gaze met mine again, because I promised I'd deliver this if I ever found her. He took a small envelope from his coat pocket. Worn, soft, the edges flaking. My name was on it, Layla, in Father Elias's handwriting. The world blurred. I tore it open, fingers trembling. Layla, if you are reading this, I am gone. But that does not mean I have left you. I've simply gone ahead, as shepherds do when they can no longer walk beside their flock. When I first found you at the clinic, I recognized something in your eyes. Not fear, but a stubbornness I had seen once before in your mother's. She never forgave me for letting her go, but she would forgive me for this. You are her daughter. That is your proof. It will matter one day when the past comes asking for receipts. Carry my name if you must. It will open the door that I could not. And if the man at the border ever asks, tell him that the truth came, wearing an old cassock and bad handwriting, and that you believed it anyway." Elias Dye pressed the paper to my chest. My tears came quietly this time. No gasping, no apology. Just release. The kind that doesn't hurt. The kind that cleans. When I looked up, Daniel was watching me. Not with pity, but with something else. Awe, maybe. Or the recognition that the world had just shifted under my feet. "What are you going to do?" he asked softly. I wiped my face. "I'm going to find the man in Marseille," I said. "If my name was written twice, once by birth and once by promise, then I'll find the place where they meet." He nodded. "I'll help you." "You can't." "I can," he said, tone quiet but unyielding. "And I will," Helen sighed. "I can't stop you both, can I?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Not legally." Gabriel handed me the registry document and closed his satchel. "Be careful, Miss Hassan. Or Miss Elias. The kind of truth you're chasing has sharp edges, but it also has light." That night, I sat by the window in Marta's kitchen, the lettuce spread out under the glow of a single bulb. She poured tea into my cup without asking why my hands shook. "What happened?" she asked in her fractured English. "I found out who I am," I said. She nodded, as if that were the most ordinary thing to discover over tea. "Good. Now you can start being her." Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. The city lights shimmered on the wet street like ink drying on paper. I read the letter one last time before folding it carefully into the envelope that had carried me across borders, across years, across versions of myself. I whispered to the silence, to the priest who had once promised my mother he would keep me safe, to the man who had believed my story when it arrived trembling at his counter. "Father," I said, "you kept your promise. Now it's my turn." The train to Marseille left at dawn, sliding out of the station like a long sigh, escaping a chest that had held too much for too long. I sat by the window, the envelope tucked safely inside my coat, my reflection moving against the fields as the sun climbed. Daniel sat across from me, reading a file he wasn't supposed to have, his coffee going cold beside him. He looked tired, not from sleep, but from caring too much about things that weren't his to fix. We didn't speak much during the journey. Silence had become our truce, a quiet language between two people who understood that words sometimes make pain more real. The train hummed, the countryside rolled past in slow greens and golds, and every now and then he would glance up from the file, studying my face, like he was trying to memorize the shape of peace. When the announcement came, Marseille Saint-Charles, next stop, something inside me trembled. The name felt heavy, ancient, like a gate opening in history. The city smelled of salt and sun-baked stone. Everything was brighter here, even the shadows. We walked through narrow streets where laundry fluttered above like flags of surrender, until we reached a small, crumbling house by the port. A brass plaque on the gate read Jean Duval, Registry Archives, retired. Daniel pressed the buzzer. A minute later, a man in his 70s opened the door, his spectacles hanging from a string around his neck. "Yes," Daniel introduced us. "Mr. Duval, I'm with Immigration in London. This is Ms. Hassan, or Ms. Elias. We're looking for information related to records Father Elias kept during the relief operations 20 years ago." The old man's eyes flickered at the name. He stepped aside without a word and motioned us in. The house was part library, part museum. Shelves overflowed with binders, and dust floated in the sunlight like old confessions. Mr. Duval led us to a study lined with boxes labeled Parish Records, 1999, 2003. He pulled one from the middle shelf, the cardboard soft with age. "I remember him," he said as he worked, his voice thin but certain. "Elias, he was reckless in the right way, always bending rules for people who needed a way through them. He laid the box on the table and opened it. Inside were dozens of yellowed files, tied with string. He flipped through until he found one marked E37. "Here," he said. He told me once that this file would matter more than the rest. I never knew why. The string snapped easily. Inside were pages, birth certificates, old passports, letters. Near the bottom was a sealed envelope with my name written across it. Leela. The handwriting was his. My hands shook as I opened it. "My dear child, if this letter finds you, it means I no longer can. I imagine you reading this in the light of some distant morning, the sea outside, your heart heavy but unbroken. That's how I always pictured you. Unbroken, even when the world tried to teach you the opposite. There is something I never told you. When your mother came to me, years ago, she was already running. Not from war, but from shame. She had loved a man she wasn't allowed to love. That man was me. We were both young, foolish, and too full of faith in our own righteousness. When she became pregnant, the world offered her no forgiveness. So she hid you under another name, and I hid behind my collar. I promised her I would protect you, no matter what that meant. When she died, that promise became the only honest thing I had left. You are not a secret. You are the proof that mercy can be born even from failure. I could not be your father in name, but I could be your witness in spirit. Every signature, every letter, every stamp I forged in your favor was a confession in disguise. A way of saying I'm sorry without saying it out loud. If you've made it this far, then you've already done what I never could. Forgiven the world enough to keep living in it. The man who helps you. The one who believed you at the border. I prayed for him before you ever met. I prayed that when you arrived, someone with kind eyes and steady hands would see you not as a case, but as a soul. Tell him thank you for me, and tell him he was right to believe. Now go, Layla, find your name. Live like it belongs to you. Father Elias. When I finished reading, the room was silent except for the faint ticking of a clock. Daniel looked at me, not shocked, not pitying, just present. "So that's why he kept you close," he said softly. "He wasn't just your protector." I nodded, tears streaming quietly down my face. "He was my father." Daniel didn't say I'm sorry. He knew better. He simply reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. Steady, grounding, wordless. Mr. Duval cleared his throat. "There's more," he said, pulling another folder from the box. "This is the record he created under your real name. It's valid, legal. You can apply for documentation under it. He made sure of it." He handed me a sheet. My birth certificate, reissued under Layla Elias, stamped, signed, and dated the year I was born. My throat tightened. He gave me a name to come back to. "Yes," Daniel said quietly. "And you just did." That evening we stood by the harbor. The sun was lowering into the sea, bleeding gold across the water. The air smelled of salt and diesel and redemption. I pulled the letter from my pocket and read the last line again. "Find your name. Live like it belongs to you." I folded it once, twice, then tucked it back into the envelope that had carried my whole life. "I think I finally understand," I said. "Understand what?" Daniel asked. "That belonging isn't a place. It's a person who looks at you and doesn't flinch." He smiled faintly. "Then, you belong here." The wind lifted the edges of my hair, and for a moment I let myself believe him. Weeks later, my new documents arrived. Official, embossed, real. The name on the top felt like an ending and a beginning all at once. Layla Elias. I went to the coast that evening alone. I carried both letters. The first, the one that got me through the border, and the last, the one that brought me home. I tore them gently, piece by piece, and let the fragments fall into the tide. The water accepted them without question, the way grace accepts confession. When I turned to leave, Daniel was standing at the edge of the sand, watching quietly. He didn't ask what I'd let go. He just said, "It's done, isn't it?" "Yes," I said. "It's done." We walked together toward the lights of the city, the sound of the sea fading behind us, the envelope finally empty, and my hands, for the first time, free. That night, before sleep took me, I whispered into the dark, "Father, I found the door. It opened. And somewhere, in whatever quiet heaven keeps its promises," I hoped he heard me.